All right, welcome everyone viewing this live stream Q&A with Dr. Gary Habermas. My name is Kevin Claran. I will be the host. Dr. Gary Habermas is the Distinguished Research Professor of Apologetics and Philosophy and Chair of the Philosophy Department at Liberty University. He received his doctorate in history from Michigan State University. Go Spartans. He is the author of 43 books, and he has a forthcoming magnus opus coming out. He has a couple more chapters left, I believe, and then the editing. Currently, it is over 5,200 pages long. He also has a Festschrift, which is a congratulatory book from his peers coming out this summer. And in that book, his peers recognize him as the foremost expert regarding the historical evidence for the resurrection. On a personal note, I want to take a moment and express my gratitude that I have for Dr. Habermas. From my late teens until I was about 27 years old, I was fairly well consumed with questions and doubts related to the topic we are discussing tonight and other related questions. I had help from family and friends and authors along my journey. When I was 27 years old, I enrolled in the first of 5 classes with Dr. Habermas. He was and continues to be a very, very helpful resource to me as I seek truth and seek to better understand why I believe what I believe. So thank you, Dr. Habermas.
Well, thank you, Kevin. I'm glad to be with you, and thank you for all you've done.
All right. Well, the Q&A tonight, folks, is going to be of the short answer variety. If you want lengthier answers, I encourage you to read Dr. Habermas's books or reference one of his many YouTube videos. Also, I wanted to mention that Dr. Habermas's YouTube channel will be starting soon. Many of the questions have been submitted already through email, but if you are viewing live, you are welcome to submit additional questions on this Facebook page, and I'll do my best to get to them. So with no further delay, let us begin. So Dr. Habermas, can you tell us about your journey with the resurrection of Jesus and what got you interested in this subject?
Well, you know, I do a fair number of interviews, and there's always a little twinge in me when I get something like that question. And I feel like saying, well, Pastor Kevin, I do it for the good of the world. I only care about other people and what they're going through, and I want to, okay, enough. I heard you say you had questions when you were in your 20s. Well, I went through about 10 years of doubt, and then 10 more years more intermittently. But for the first 10 years, it was like, I mean, I was really into sports, mostly football, hockey, so on. So I didn't care too much about my studies. So I would play sports in the afternoon, depending on what it was, what's going on. And then at night, I would come in, and my first question was, where did I leave off the night before? And I didn't do it for everybody else and their doubts. I did it because I was having doubts. Now, years later, I'm very thankful for opportunities like this because to me, the idea of ministry kind of consumes my life lately. I just think it's fantastic that we can help others. And doubt is very, very prominent in people's lives. So I'm glad to help people through it. But all I'm trying to say is it didn't start that way. It started because I was consumed by it. There's several biographical comments I could give. There's no necessity to do it now, but several points where I could tell I was pretty far down the doubt road because I had some responses that now, if I knew somebody who had those responses and came to me for doubt, I'd be kind of concerned. But including a fascination with Buddhism after I got my PhD. Well, I say that because a lot of people say, well, I had doubts. I looked at Buddhism. How old were you? 14, you know, that kind of stuff. After my PhD, and I was enamored with Buddhism, and I don't know, it was a scary time for me. But yeah, it was to answer my questions, and I would just say the Lord brought me through it.
Thank you very much. Would you say that it's important for Christians to have reasons for believing what they believe, and why not just simply trust God?
You know, this is a really good question, and it's kind of a both-and question. Let me cite the Gospel of John twice in John chapter 10 and in John chapter 14 Jesus makes comments. Now, he was challenged many times. They said, critics said, how do we know you're who you say you are? Why should we accept you as a prophet or the Messiah or whatever? But in those two occasions, John 10 and John 14, I think it's more clear in John 14. Jesus basically says, if you don't believe me for my word's sake, believe me for my works' sake. Now, works in John, as in other places, works, Book of Psalms, many places, works is kind of a catchword for miracles. Works is kind of a catchword for mighty acts. And when Jesus said, believe me, if you don't believe me for my word's sake, believe me for my works' perspective, I think, I'd have to be honest and say, I think he preferred people to believe because they heard him say it. It registered with their spirit. Over and over again in the Gospels, it says, this man speaks as somebody having authority, not as one of the leaders of the people.
Right.
I think Jesus preferred him just to hear it and say, wow, that is really wise. I think I'll believe. But he said, if you have to, at least believe the works. So at worst, works as a second-class citizen, but Jesus, A, still did them, and B, said it was okay to believe because of them. So I think it could work either way, but I certainly don't condemn people who say, God just did a real work on me, and I know in my heart that Jesus has been raised from the dead, and I'm happy for all you guys do on creation, or I'm happy for what you do on intelligent design, or God's existence, or resurrection. I'm happy for it, but I really don't need it. I never condemn those sorts of folks. I think they're, that's fine.
How helpful has reasons been for you?
Extremely so. It really is a different strokes for different folks thing. And I think some people are built more than others. Maybe I'm just pig-headed. Maybe I'm just telling myself wrong things. Maybe I'm just believing garbage. But it seems to me, from my own self, that I'm built such that if you're going to tell me it's really big and it's very powerful, eternal life, plan of salvation, God wants you to minister to others. If you're going to tell me something that's important, I kind of want to see what's behind this. I want to know, because as even John says, 1 John, he says, many false spirits have gone out in the world, and you can hear all kinds of stuff. Old Testament, not everybody does miracles from God. Not everyone that prophesies is from God. That's Deuteronomy 13 and 18, respectively. So I'm a little skeptical, and the Bible allows us to ask questions, so I do.
Thank you very much. Here's a question that was submitted prior to our discussion. Jesus' life here on earth and his resurrection took place close to 2,000 years ago. Why something that happened almost 2,000 years ago, why does it matter so much today?
Well, there's a lot of ways you can go after this. What if I said, now it's not 2,000 years, but what if I said, George Washington lived 200 years ago, and more than that, we're almost 250, and he was the first president of the United States. That's important to us, isn't it? Well, or is it? Who cares? It's history. Well, there's a lot of historical things that are really important. And there's an old saying, those who don't abide by history are bound to repeat it. There's a lot of lessons from history that are kind of scary. So you should pay attention. So, but I'd go further and I'd say, because there's good evidence. There's good evidence for things that happened long ago. And in the case of Jesus, there's an incredible amount of evidence that Jesus is who he said he was. And not just the resurrection, although I think by far that's the best evidence.
All right. Next question. Let's see. What are the essentials of the gospel, and how is the resurrection related to the gospel?
Important question, for sure. The key to the Gospels, and also the epistles, the key to the New Testament is the gospel presentation, not to be confused with the four gospels. The gospel in Greek, it simply means good news. And it was often put in a way that it meant what is proclaimed. The evangelion, what was proclaimed. And what we call evangelicals today, evangelicals are the view that says you need to have a personal relationship with Jesus. So, on that kind of idea, there's two sides to the gospel. What it is, and how do you get there? It's like saying, if I could use an analogy, there's two sides to getting married. Do you have somebody in mind? Have you checked them out? Do you is there somebody you want to spend your life with? And if you go, yes, so we're married, right? No, you don't have to have a long ceremony, but you at least have to say, I do. You have to make a commitment. Better or worse, rich or poor, till death do we part? I do. And that's how it is with Christianity. When the gospel is defined in the New Testament, it is always death and resurrection. And almost always the deity of Christ is in the same sentence. In other words, I don't think Paul would be happy. I think you get some verses for this where he would say, oh, you believe in the death and resurrection? Yeah, but I don't believe he's the Son of God. Oh, yeah, well, that's fine. You believe in death and resurrection. You don't see anything like that in the New Testament. So I'd say deity, death, resurrection. He's the Son of God, died for our sins, rose from the dead. That's the facts. Now the question is, do you want to get married? Do you want to say, I do to Jesus? You've met a person, you think they're the right one for you. We talk about courting, spending time with them, but you got to say, I do. In the Gospels and in the epistles over and over again, people make choices. And it's sometimes called received Christ. It's sometimes called trusted him with your heart. In the New Testament, trusting him with your heart means believing him with your whole person. So the Greek word, by the way, for believe, the Greek words, pisteuo, pistis, the noun, it means to commit. So I think it's very similar to I do. So you have a body of knowledge. I'd say, think about deity, death, resurrection. And are you willing to say I do? And one important qualification, you don't say I do to facts. I get that point. I love facts as much as anybody. But you don't say I do to facts. Just like a marriage, you don't say I do to qualities. You say I do to a person who has those qualities. I do is a personal choice, and saying I do to Jesus is a personal choice, and a person, not, you don't believe in history. You commit yourself to Jesus. That's the gospel in a nutshell, I think.
Okay. Very much. Similar question. Must someone believe in the bodily resurrection of Jesus to be a Christian?
Yeah, that's a tough one. All right. If I said deity, death, resurrection, deity would be keys like Son of God, and especially the word Lord. Jesus is called God a few times in the New Testament, but Lord is very special because in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the word Lord in Greek is the translation for the Old Testament Yahweh, the holiest name of God, without vowels, so you theoretically couldn't pronounce it, YHWH, Yahweh. It's translated in the Greek as Lord. That's probably the key word for deity. All right, the key word for death is for us. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15, the clearest early creedal text, he died for our sins according to the scriptures. So it's not just any old death, death for sins, and he was raised from the dead and appeared. The word for raised, in Hebrew belief, but New Testament times, New Testament's in Greek, the word is anastasis and egero. It means resurrection and raised. Those words with the Hebrew background have to do with bodies. It's sort of like this. When you say in 1 Corinthians 15, he died for our sins according to the scriptures, and they already called him Christ. Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, was buried, rose again the third day according to the scriptures, and appeared. Well, that word means to stay. The word for resurrection anastasis, it means to stand up again. So when you say Christ died, buried, rose, appeared, those 4 words, died, buried, rose, appeared, means what went down is what came up. Now, Paul said there was a change, not exactly the same. The body that comes up is not going to have to die again. So there's changes. But the New Testament belief is bodily resurrection. Now, back to your question. What if a person believes in the resurrection? They really, really, really believe Jesus was raised and really, really, really believe Jesus appeared, but they take a less than bodily view and they think he appeared in the room like a glorified spirit, but he was really there. And maybe he could even move a glass of water, or maybe he could even move a pencil. I mean, maybe he could really do something, but he's not what we would call a normal definition of a body. I hate to sound evasive, but I think the answer is that's for God to decide. I'm not the judge of the universe. I think to believe in resurrection is a key idea, but resurrection means bodily. If you go, well, I'll take resurrection, but less than bodily, it's sort of like saying, I'm not going to jump in with both feet. I'm going to jump in with a foot and a half. Now, am I in or not? That's for the people who make the rules. And I think that question is for God. I think you want to be safe. You want to go, he's deity. He died for our sins according to the scriptures, was buried and rose again, and a body. Now, you can quibble about what kind of body it is, how much change was in it. If he had a mole on his right cheek, would he still have a mole on his cheek in the resurrection? I don't know. I don't have a verse for you. You can ask those kind of questions, and people do. But I don't think we have anything to go on, so I think it's up to God. Resurrection's the key, though.
All right. Thanks again. Next question. What do you think is the toughest objection to Jesus' resurrection, and how do you answer it?
Up until recently, I've been giving one every time. Since then, I've thought of a second one. I think they're probably hand in glove. They're different, but they kind of go together. One is, you're not just asking me to believe in a resurrection. You're asking me to believe in another world. And you go, well, I don't remember saying that. No, think about it. If you're raised in a way where you'll never die again, and this earth is for people who die and get buried, I guess theoretically you could live here forever and ever and ever on the earth if it's not destroyed, but isn't there a place more conducive to an afterlife? And we'd say, well, yeah, there's the intermediate state, and Christians usually believe there's a heaven, or some Christians express what others call heaven is a remade earth. But it's a different place. And so one objection is you need another world. And since there's not another world, since we don't know there's a Middle Earth, we don't know there's an Narnia, or a secular example, we don't know there's an Oz, you got to do two things. You have to have a resurrection, you have to have another world. Now, as far as you get there, any good argument for God's existence, not a lot of people deny it no matter what, but any good argument for God's existence would automatically, with very few exceptions, an argument for God is going to give you another world. So if there's a God and he chooses to do something, are you going to keep him from raising Jesus? Okay, that's one. But I prefer to use near-death experiences as my example, because near-death experiences are very evidential. There are hundreds, over 300 evidential cases, and some of them are very impressive. And just to skip right to the chase here, if near-death experiences where people report data that are verified without measurable heart or brain, and often at the same time, no heart or brain in the same person, activity, but they report something that can be verified in the real world, the world we walk in. All right. If there's an afterlife, because according to the machines, your heart and brain are not working.
And you're talking about people seeing things, not just hearing things, correct? Like,
seeing, hearing, 5 senses there are many of these things with more than one sense.
And
But the
blind.
important thing is that they can be verified. The things they report can be verified. Now, I'm just making this up, right? But what if people call 911 and you're laying on the floor and there's no room, there's no windows in the room you're in, but you say I was up above my body and I saw everybody pounding on my chest or working on me. And I looked out in the street because you're right near the edge of the wall. And you looked out in the street because you were up above your body and you saw a car accident. Now, again, this isn't a real example, but let's say you go, stupid driver, the guy that drove the green car went right through the stop sign and he hit something he shouldn't have. And then you go back and get a police report, and the accident happened after you were out, because now we have a 911 call, and they know when they called and when you came back, but the accident already happened. In other words, you can compare these things and get some evidence. If there's an afterlife, I think that's very, very, very important, because afterlife is the category in which resurrection occurs. Resurrection is, first and foremost, a certain species of afterlife. And if there is an afterlife, man, you got a whopper of a head start talking about another world. Now, if you have evidence for the resurrection, we're starting to get there. But the other objection I can say faster, the other one that I'm starting to get more and more lately, it's hard for people to grasp this. It's not a hard concept, but they keep making the mistake. And that's this. You'll say, well, I'm going to use an argument tonight where I will use facts the critics allow. I'll use their facts. The Bible I'm using is the critics' Bible. We don't have to prove inspiration or reliability. Yeah, I believe that stuff, but we don't have to prove it to get a resurrection. We can use the skeptics' Bible and get it. And then they'll go, okay, give me an example. And you go, well, let's talk about 1 Corinthians 15. They go, oh, there you go. You're using the Bible. That point doesn't come across very well. I'm saying, yes, I'm using 1 Corinthians 15 because there is not an accredited critical scholar. I mean, somebody in an approved field with a terminal degree, usually professor of Bible, theology, history, classics, philosophy. There is somebody who studies that area. Those people are not going to tell you they're not going to say you can't open the Bible up, because they're going to tell you, Bart Ehrman, atheist New Testament scholar, he'll quote more verses than Christians will. And he even says, do I quote verses because it's the New Testament, it's inspired? He goes, no, I quote the verses because they're well evidenced. Okay. So the second objection is you're using the Bible, it's a prejudiced source. Well, go tell Bart Ehrman that, the atheist New Testament scholar. And if he uses them, I'll use the same ones he's using. I'm satisfied to use his verses. So, critics.
He uses them on historical grounds?
Sorry?
He uses the Bible on historical grounds.
Right. I often use the illustration. A spider doesn't get caught in its own web because however you explain it, it seems the spider knows what strands to run on and what strands not to run on. And you might see a spider in a web, I guess, if another spider went after him. But the spider who built the web, he doesn't end up caught in the web. And critics know what strands to run on. They know what verses are well accredited. And someone could say, well, what are they? I'll just simply say, I'll use theirs. I'm happy to use theirs and get a resurrection.
Right. How about on the other side of the coin? What would you say are some of the best reasons for having confidence the resurrection actually happened?
Oh, you know what? That's interesting. You're going to bring that question up next. I would use the exact approach I just mentioned. I use what's called the minimal facts argument. That's the most common name I use, but you could call it the lowest common denominator argument. I will use the data that an atheist New Testament scholar like Bart Ehrman is pleased to use. And I can name other atheist New Testament scholars, skeptics, Jewish New Testament scholars who are Jewish non-Christians. I'll use their data. And the minimal facts argument, which I facetiously tease at a state university once in a while, I'll say, I call this my heads I win, tails you lose argument. So they lose either way. And everybody laughs. And,
Dr. Habermas, since I'm on staff here at Bedrock, can I offer a shameless plug? I've heard Mike Licona, one of your pupils, call it the Bedrock fact.
He does, because he's got a major 750 book on the page book, and it is the best. There's another book by Tom Wright that's about equally as long as Mike's. Mike's is a pinch longer. But I think in historical terms, by the way, Tom Wright is the best argument for your earlier question, resurrection meaning a bodily event. Mike Licona is the best argument for the historicity of the resurrection. Okay. And I think he's right on. I use the word minimal facts. He does too. He uses the word minimal facts, but he calls those facts the bedrock. So you're right. It's right there in your logo on the screen, and he calls them bedrock. Those are the. Here's a short definition. The bedrock facts, as Mike Licona uses them, the bedrock facts are the facts that friend and foe concede. Believers and unbelievers. You have to be a scholar, and you have to have credentials. We don't want you saying, well, yeah, I lay bricks for a living. Well, there's nothing wrong with being a mason, but I don't tell you how to lay bricks, and don't tell me how to do history. I mean, we all know that rule.
All right, so I think I know where you're heading. So the best reasons supporting the resurrection, I believe you're going to be talking about, again, atheist, agnostic, critical scholars, just people that are specialists in the field. These are facts that all these folks agree upon.
That's correct. That's a good way to say it. And again, I will give examples. Who agrees to that stuff? Or somebody, a real critic might say, who agrees to that garbage? Those facts. Well, an atheist New Testament scholar like a Bart Ehrman or a Gerrit Ludemann, German New Testament scholar. Agnostics like I think he's British, but he actually teaches in a German university. His name is Wedderburn. Or a Jewish New Testament scholar like Pinchas Lapid, who had a PhD in New Testament. He's Jewish, but he had a PhD in New Testament from a German university. They would all agree about these facts. Now, one of them might give you 12, and one of them might give you 17, and one of them might give you 11, but maybe nobody has 3 of the 11. Okay, I'm pleased to take, like I would call it, the lowest common denominator and use just those.
Okay, so you take the facts that critical scholars grant, and you build your resurrection case from there.
Yep. And I usually use 6. I often call it 6 plus 1. And the reason for the plus 1, I use facts that have 2 qualifications. I won't use any fact that is not supported. I often use an illustration like this. Here's the fact. And this fact is supported by a bunch of evidences. I was telling my research assistant, Ben Shaw, today on the phone, that the fact which is supported by the most number of sub-facts is the fact that the disciples had experiences that they thought were appearances of the risen Jesus. And I got over 40 of these texts or rules historians use, or texts that critics allow. Mostly those 2 categories. Historians' rules and texts that are good. And there's over 30 of them for that fact. The empty tomb, over 20. Now, the second rule is, because the evidence is so good. Now, when I say over 30 and over 20, keep in mind, it's over 30 and over 20 according to the critics. Somebody believes the Bible's inspired might have 50. Oh, well, here's this verse, and the critic goes, I don't like that verse. I don't like that verse. We're using the critics' verses. And you get over 30 for the one and over 20 for the other one. But the second rule is that about 90-something% of all scholars, accredited scholars, over 90% are going to admit these facts. And that's the plus 1, because the empty tomb, there's very few facts that have more evidence than the empty tomb. But scholars are a little slow getting there, because in the 70s it was a minority view. Now it's been making a comeback, and about 75% of them believe it, but all the other facts are in the 90s. So the empty tomb is plus 1 that has excellent evidence, not quite as unanimous acceptance by critics. But the other 6, you're almost not going to find any critic, no matter how much they disagree. You're not going to find hardly any critic that's going to disagree with the first 6.
Okay. And along with that, what is the earliest evidence for the resurrection of Jesus? Is the resurrection account a late legend?
Yeah, not a prayer. I mean, no chance. The earliest gospel is almost always said to be Mark. Mark is about real easy dates here. The crucifixion is usually put at 30 AD. Mark is usually put at 70. That's plus 40. Now, before you say anything, I mean, wait, let me finish the picture. Matthew is about 10 years later, maybe 15, which makes him 50 or 55. Luke is about the same, 50 or 55 years later. And John is the latest of all, still in the first century, usually dated about 95 AD. And 95 subtract 30, that's a date for the crucifixion, is plus 65. And a lot of critics who aren't scholars, as a general rule, love to say, 65 years, that's horrendous. Okay, well, you're telling me what you don't know about ancient history. You're showing off, that you haven't studied ancient history. First of all, why use John at plus 65 when you can use Mark at plus 40? That's one. But here's a better comeback. What do we have in the ancient world? Do you think all facts in the ancient world are arrived at like within a month? I mean, the one I like to use because critics use this example is Alexander the Great. Yeah, I'm not talking about a half a sentence in a rock. I'm not talking about a long live Alexander somewhere. I'm talking about a story about him. Who is this man? I mean, long live Alexander. Who's Alexander? Is he an Egyptian? No, he's Greek. How do we know that? Well, you want to have a little story here. Well, the earliest story, call it a gospel if you want, earliest good news about Alexander was written almost 300 years after he died. You could take other religious figures, any religious figure. There's really nobody compares to the early sources for the New Testament. Now, the earliest of the early, Mark is early at plus 40, but there's a category there's two categories that are pre-Mark, at least. First of all, I'll stick with the gospel since we're already there. Almost every critic believes, no matter how liberal, no matter how what, almost every critic believes that each of the gospels had sources behind them. They use sources to put the text together.
So Q and M?
Matthew, pardon me?
Q and M?
Yeah, M is a source that they just call it M. M is a source Matthew used that none of the other gospels, as far as we know, used. Q is another source that Matthew and Luke use, but Mark doesn't and John doesn't. L is a source that Luke used. Now, the first four verses of Luke specifically says, I checked other people, and he says eyewitnesses. I checked other people. Plus, he was a companion of Paul. But here's some of the examples. Mark is believed to have a passion narrative, a pre-passion narrative. It is often dated at the latest 37 AD. Now we can get there. We can show you why. These are critics, and they think this source Mark used is by 37 AD. That's a plus 7 years. Okay. Luke says he interviewed in Luke 1:1-4. He says I interviewed other sources, and he was a companion of Paul. John is believed to have used a source called the miracle source. Well, how do you know that? Because when John's recounting the miracles, he says about the turning the water to wine, he says, now, he numbers the miracles. This is miracle number 2. This is miracle number 3. John numbers them. And so to number them like that, he could be saying this is 2, this is 3. But critics think he was actually using a source where he could have gotten these numbers. So there are sources behind the Gospels, and the worst it gets is Mark at plus 40. Alexander, almost plus 300. Oh, by the way, the best sources for Alexander are about 4.25 to 450 years later. Almost half a millennium are the best sources for Alexander. So, and someone goes, yeah, well, I'm not basing my life on Alexander. Besides, it's a history book. You're asking me to believe religious propaganda. Really? Well, Plutarch's Alexander, which is probably the best known, Plutarch's Alexander starts like this. It's commonly believed that Alexander was the son of a god and his mother was a virgin. You go, whoa, virgin. Do we have virgin born before Christianity? Well, Plutarch, that book, It was actually written almost 100 years after. Well, Jesus was alive. The book was almost 100 years later from when Jesus lived. Plutarch was written almost 100 years later, about 85 years later than when Jesus lived and died. So the other sources aren't very good. That's one. But here's the other response. In the New Testament, there are dozens of short little passages. Let's call them creeds. They're often called creeds or traditions or creedal traditions. Use both words. Yeah. And the New Testament writers report teachings that have been spread around since the earliest church. And critics believe, Bart Ehrman, the atheist New Testament scholar, Bart Ehrman believes we have a number of these creeds from within his dating 1 to 2 years of the cross. So let's just work it backwards. John, not bad at plus 65. In the ancient world, that's good. Matthew and Luke, plus 55. Not bad in the ancient world. Mark, plus 40. Not bad in the ancient world. Each of those have sources before them. Oh, when are they? I don't know. Maybe John's source is 70. Maybe Mark's source is 50. And critics say that. But what about these early creeds? Plus 1 to 2 years. What? We have sources from plus 1 to 2? Yeah. What are you, Baptist? What are you, some fundamentalist? No, I'm quoting Bart Ehrman. I'm quoting Garrett Ludeman, atheist New Testament scholars who don't believe in a resurrection. Atheist New Testament scholars. Why are they saying it? Because they say the evidence is really good. And they'll even tell you what the evidence is.
And of these creeds, how much of the gospel is in them?
It's all there.
It's all there.
Yeah, these are, one of them is the one I already cited. Paul said, I gave you what I was given. I call that a first century footnote. Paul says, I gave you what I was given. Paul's basically saying, this isn't mine, I got it from somebody else. If you did that today, you might be blamed with plagiarism. Let's just say I got it from John Smith in a book he wrote in 1997. That's how you make a footnote. But Paul did it their way. I delivered it to you as a first importance, he says. This is the very most important thing you can believe. I gave you the most important thing that I got from somebody else. And it's that 1 Corinthians, you can look it up, 1 Corinthians 15. I could cite the beginning of it, but he said, this is the gospel that I preached to you, that if you believe it, you're saved. And here's how it goes. Christ died for our sins, according to the scriptures, was buried, rose again, and appeared to James. Rose again and appeared to Peter and the 12 disciples. That's how it starts. His name is Christ. That's not his real name, but that's his title. His name's Jesus, but Paul calls him Christ, a title. And he died for our sins, was buried, rose from the dead, and appeared. That's the gospel. That's in that creed. Here's another one, Romans 10:9. If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. So if you tell people, often that's thought to be in baptism, but if you tell people, Jesus is Lord, that verse, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, Jesus is Lord. Remember, that's the Greek for the Old Testament, Jehovah. Yeah, I believe he's Lord, and I believe in my heart that he's been raised from the dead. What's the order there? Lord, raised, dead. That's the gospel. So there's two texts right there where they got. Another one's Romans 1, 3, and 4. There's many of them. But those are early texts from that early period where the whole gospel's in the same text. And it's not me. This is Bart Ehrman, Garrett Ludeman, and others. Pinchas Lapid, a Jewish New Testament scholar, and the other two are atheists.
Okay, so both verses that you reference, or both scripture that you reference, the one in 1 Corinthians 15 and the Romans 10:9, they're dated by critical scholars within 5 years of the crucifixion and the resurrection.
Actually, 5 years would be a little late. Bart Ehrman says that these earliest creeds were probably in existence while Paul was on the way to Damascus and believed he met the risen Jesus. In other words, when Paul was still trying to catch and persecute Christians, these creeds were already in existence, coming from Jerusalem, and Bart Ehrman says maybe from the apostles themselves. But Paul was an unbeliever, so it didn't come from him, but he probably knew them. That's Bart Ehrman.
All right, so just to summarize a bit, if people, skeptics on the internet are making a lot of claims, or making a claim that the resurrection account was late, and it's one of legend. The creeds in 1 Corinthians and in Romans 10:9 blow that out of the water.
Yeah, when you think about how early it is, and you know what? Now let's get it. Here's a tough objection. You were back to what about objections earlier. Here's an armchair critic who's not really a scholar, but here's an armchair critic. All you're telling me is, even if you're right, you got a bunch of these little stories told by whom? Christians. Okay. And when did they say this? After Jesus was raised. Who they believe Jesus was? The Son of God and Lord. So this is their dogma, right? Yes. We can call this propaganda, right? Well, if you want to be, if you want to be kind, if you want to say propaganda like this is what the early church believed, you go, oh, all it is an ancient story. All it is an ancient story. I'd say, okay, now you got to ask the next question. Where do they come from? If you already admit we know what they are and where they are, and you already admit they're really, really early, where do they come from? And Paul tells us, the skeptic Paul, after he became a Christian, when's that? Well, now Mark's plus 40, but when does Paul become a Christian? Almost always dated at 2 to 3 years after the cross, 32 or 33 after the cross. These creeds were already in existence while Paul was walking to Damascus. All right, great. But where do they come from? It sounds like Christian propaganda. No, because Paul said, after I met the risen Jesus, he went up to Jerusalem 3 years later. So now we're talking 35 or 36. You used a year 35 a moment ago. That's the later date. I mean, how do you like that? 5 years is a late date. But Paul went to Jerusalem. He spent 15 days with Peter and James, the brother of Jesus, who, by the way, we have first century martyrdom sources for all three of them. One by Josephus, non-Christian.
And that's what we can read in Galatians, correct? We can read about it in chapter
1. Yeah, and Paul goes back in Galatians 2. He makes 2 trips, and that time John's there too. So he's interviewing these guys. Bart Ehrman says, where do we get closer to eyewitnesses than right here in this text? Where do you get closer to eyewitnesses? So Ehrman says Paul probably got him from the apostles right then and there. So, all right, do we know where these texts are? Unanimous among Christians. Oh, do we know the year? Yes, everyone admits it. Oh, well, who did they come from? Probably when Paul interviewed the guys who saw the risen Jesus. Now you're tightening the noose. We know what they are, when they were, and who they came from, i.e., eyewitnesses.
Okay. And just for folks who aren't familiar with Bart Ehrman, would you say that, for skeptics who ask, would you say he's the top skeptical New Testament scholar in the world?
Depends on what you want. He's certainly one of them. He's probably the best known skeptical New Testament scholar. Gert Ludemann is a German atheist New Testament scholar. He's probably the German equivalent of Bart Ehrman. And if you want to use guys who they're not quite as strong like atheists, but they're Jewish non-Christians, another religion. They're Jewish non-Christians. You can give a list of those who believe these facts, like a guy named Gezer Vermesh, who's a Oxford historian, Jewish historian. You could use Pinchas Lapid, the guy I said earlier, who's got a PhD in New Testament, and he's Jewish. Not Christian. They're not Christian.
Okay, so very, very early sources. Hey, Dr. Habermas, would you mind if I just backed up for a moment? I was just checking the comments, and got a few people asking the same question that we didn't maybe nail down a few minutes ago. Special shout out to JP, who helped put this on. Hey, JP, and also Jason out in Colorado. What are those 6 bedrock facts that you mentioned?
You got to get that word bedrock in there, don't you?
Yes.
Okay, bedrock facts. When I said 6 plus 1, the first one is that Jesus died. And you go, by crucifixion. You go, well, that doesn't prove the resurrection. No, but he's got to be dead before he can rise. So I'm willing to use one of the 6 to get the crucifixion. And by the way, virtually no critical scholar questions death by crucifixion. John Dominic Crossan, who's one of the most skeptical guys in the world, co-founder of the Jesus Seminar, John Dominic Crossan said, he takes it utterly for granted that Jesus died by crucifixion. And he and Marcus Borg, another co-founder of the Jesus Seminar, they're very skeptical, and they both say that the fact that Jesus died on the cross is maybe the best established fact in the ancient world. So, all right, he died on the cross. Here's the big.
Can I just hit pause there? I got a Muslim friend who I talked to about this, and he's quick to say that the crucifixion is something that critical scholars unanimously accept, but Islamic scholars do not accept it because scripture was corrupted and so forth. What would you say about that?
Well, I'd like to say a lot. Here's one thing I'd say. I'm not a Muslim scholar, so I'm not going to tell a Muslim how to read Arabic and what the Quran says. Muslim scholars do not know, I'm assuming, don't know Greek. And I don't mean, I know a few words. I mean, sight read Greek and know what these words mean. And they don't have PhDs in New Testament. So it's sort of like, I won't tell you what you believe and you don't tell us what we believe. I mean, you're not in our area. Here's the biggest problem. I'm not criticizing the Quran. I'm just giving a report. Muslims say the Quran is written about 630 AD. About that. Right. Jesus died in 30 AD. Subtract 30 from 630, and the difference for anybody who does math doesn't make a difference what religion you are. Just subtract 30 from 630. 600 years later. Now, I'm trying to be kind here, but if the Muslim says, yeah, but it's the word of God. Well, Christians can say that about the New Testament too. So here's how this discussion goes. The Muslim. Yeah, but you're using a false book. Christian. No, you're using a false book. Muslim. Well, my true book says Jesus didn't die. Christian. My true book says he did. Well, and I won't say who's saying each of these, but one of them goes, well, you're going to hell. And the other one goes, yeah, well, where do you think you're going, buddy? So what I mean is it boils down to a name-calling contest. Right. And if you're not careful, they're both saying, that's what my book says, to which my response is, that's wonderful. But I'm using what critics say. And 600, here's my main point, 600 years after the fact is too late to call that a historical report. You go, what's an historical report? Because it's really close to Muhammad. You're missing my point. It's 600 years after Jesus lived. It's too late to say what happened to Jesus is your way. You can talk about Muhammad if you want to. And actually, I'll say something nice. The Quran is actually one of the closer attested sources in years. So I'm not trying to put the Quran down. I'm just saying, when was your book? About 630. When was Jesus died? About 600 years earlier. How can you tell me 600 years later you know what's happening? If you're going to write a book about George Washington that's 600 years after the fact, we've got about, 350 more years to go before we can even write that book? We wouldn't call that history. So it's not the historical method. Unless you just want to say, well, the Quran's the word of God. Of course, the Christian's going to say, well, the New Testament's the word of God. No, but the Quran's really the word of God. The Christian, oh yeah, well, the New Testament's really the word of God. The difference is I'm using the facts that Jewish PhDs in New Testament use, and I'm using the facts which atheists who don't believe in the resurrection will still grant you. My method is not to get in an argument about whose text is more inspired.
Are you aware of any non-Islamic scholar who does not believe the crucifixion took place?
Well, okay. I've done a head count of every major text just about since 1975 from guys who could be considered scholars in the field, terminal degree in a relevant field, classics, history, philosophy, theology. And, a number of Jewish scholars have PhDs in New Testament. So you can do it and not be a Christian. Or you can be an atheist and not be a Christian. Yes, of everybody I know, there's, as Bart Ehrman says, probably maybe 10,000 of those guys in the world. I have probably, there might be 5 to 10 out of 10,000.
5 to 10 out of 10,000 would say the crucifixion did not happen.
or at least they might raise questions and just leave it as a question mark.
Okay.
In other words, they'd be agnostic. Yeah, almost nobody when you're counting. I mean, okay, can you find anybody in the world who's got scholarly scientific credentials and they believe the Earth's flat? You go, yeah, he's a dummy. I didn't ask you that. I said, does he have a PhD in some area of science? Yeah. Does he believe the Earth's flat? Actually, I got a close friend who's got a PhD in one of the sciences who believes the Earth's flat. Okay. So now should we all go out and believe it? Heck no, he's an idiot. You know how those discussions would go. Okay, so maybe you got 5.
Okay.
8. There's not many.
All right. So not to get too bogged down on the crucifixion. So minimal facts. Number 1 out of 6 that you mentioned, the crucifixion.
Yeah, number 2
Jesus died on the cross.
Number 2 is the most important. The disciples, I'm wording it very carefully. The disciples had experiences that they believed were the words of the risen Jesus. The disciples had experiences that they believed were words of the risen Jesus. Sorry. The disciples had experiences that they believed were appearances of the risen Jesus. They believed it. And there's over 30 different evidential arguments for they thought they saw the risen Jesus. Now, skeptics just going to go, that's right, you're right. They thought they saw the risen Jesus. But what you're going to have to do is come back with alternative views. Well, what do you think happened? And they're going to be like Swiss cheese. Okay, third one. We've already done it. It was reported very, very early. James D.G. Dunn, who's as influential as any New Testament scholar today, Dunn says that 1 Corinthians 15 creed probably dates from the same year, or at least could date from the exact same year Jesus was crucified. Same year. Early. And Bart Ehrman says all those creeds were probably in existence before Paul went to Damascus. At least could have been. Okay, fourthly, their lives were transformed by this teaching. Now, this point is highly misunderstood, and people are going to go, well, all my Muslim friends believe that the earliest Muslims, their lives were transformed. Somebody else is going to say, well, all Buddhist students were transformed by Buddha. And someone else is going to say, all the Hindus in the world and all the followers of Moses, and they were all transformed. Okay, I get your point. I wouldn't even deny that. But here's the point. Whereas everybody else is reporting a belief. I think Moses is a prophet. I think Muhammad is a prophet. I think Zoroaster is a prophet. I think Buddha was an enlightened man. Okay, they have beliefs on those things. But Christians didn't die for what they believed. Christians didn't die for a theology text. They died, as you can tell from several New Testament verses, they died because they thought they saw the risen Jesus. They died because they thought they saw the risen Jesus. And they turned the world upside down. Now, what's more likely? I'm dying for what I saw, or I'm dying for a book that I'm committed to? Probably something I saw, if it's real clear, is going to be the better argument. And that's what science is based on, sense experience. And we've got that for those who saw Jesus. And then the last 2 are easy because they're very similar. 2 skeptics, Paul and James, both became believers because of what they thought was an appearance of the risen Jesus. Those 6. And then my +1 is the empty tomb. Heavy on the evidence. Not as many critics because it took them a long time to get the conclusion they're getting to now. So those would be my 6 + 1 or 7 facts. Okay. And they're going to be admitted by virtually everybody.
All right. So if I could put on a skeptic hat for a moment, even if, it is, but even if the 1 Corinthians 15 creed has a very early date, which critical scholars will accept, how can you trust the very gospel accounts are true, having been written decades after the purported events?
Well, first of all, we've already said Mark, Matthew, usually this order, Mark, Matthew, Luke, John, are all early enough that they compare very well against either secular or religious sources in the ancient world. So even the Gospels are within this range. Here's Bart Ehrman. I hate to quit quoting this guy, but he's not a Christian. He doesn't believe in the resurrection. He says, when I give you a list of sources, I'm going to count the first 100 years. All right, First 100 years is going to go 30 AD to 130 AD. John has been written for 35 years by that point. And Bart Ehrman accepts John. So the Gospels are plenty early. But if you're going to give me 100 years, what do you think about me using these creedal sources for just 1 to 2 years after? There's nothing like that. A guy named Paul Barnett, he's an Australian historian. Paul Barnett says there's nothing in the ancient world where a major personage is attested by evidence at +1. We don't have that. Where we have accounts, historical accounts. It's super, super evidence.
Okay, awesome. Okay, next question. Let's see what we have here. What separates the resurrection of Jesus from other resurrection stories in the ancient world, i.e. Horus, Osiris, etc., Egyptian mythology and so forth?
Yeah, first of all, you have to know that there are stories like that. I just finished doing over 100 pages research using largely classical scholars who don't claim to be Christians, or I don't know what they are. These aren't like believers who are in church every Sunday and sing praise to God. I mean, I just finished this study, and the best known scholars in this debate, some of them very skeptical, say there are no such accounts in the ancient world. There are no pre-Christian resurrection accounts. And when someone goes, that's crazy. That's crazy. You've got the story of Osiris, one of the ones you mentioned. You've got the story of Osiris from, let's just pick a date, 1000 BC. Okay. But here's the problem. Where does the account say Osiris was raised from the dead? It doesn't. Osiris, he after he dies, he's living again because his wife, Isis, sprinkles holy water on him, or in one of the myths, all the Gospels are like that. Yeah, well, nobody sprinkles holy water on anybody and brings somebody back from the dead. And another story is she turns into a bird. A woman turns into a bird, flaps her wings over him, and he comes back. Okay, but here's what I mean by comes back. He doesn't walk around on the earth. When he revives, he goes directly to the underworld and becomes the god of the underworld. It's not a resurrection. As one very prominent scholar says, who studies this for his whole life, very prominent scholar says, Osiris is not raised, he goes to hell. And the whole idea of going to hell is the exact opposite of going to heaven, which is the Christian gospel. So it's not, but he was still raised. No. Helmut Kirster is a very, very liberal German. He passed away recently, but Helmut Kirster is a very liberal German New Testament scholar. And Kirster says in his huge introduction to the New Testament, he says, it's good to keep in mind that the texts never say that Osiris was raised from the dead. The texts never teach a resurrection for Osiris. So some of these ancient heroes, the end of the story breaks off. A lot of them, the end of the story breaks off. You don't know what happens. Other ones, the guy leaves town and he doesn't show up for 3 years. And when he comes back, they go, oh, he's raised. Well, he never died in the first place. He left town. So he comes back. Many people move out of a city and they come back years later. We don't say they were raised. So I can give you names, but of the biggest named scholars in this discussion, quite a few of them believe that there are none of those. But even if they are, there are stories about people who by and large never lived. There are stories about planting vegetation in the spring largely and having the vegetation gets harvested in the fall. That's life and then death in the fall. And then you say, when's the raise? Well, the raise is the next spring when they grow up again. This is the time of year here where I've got a tree out in front that's a pecan tree, and it's really slow, and it's like this every single year, and the buds are just coming out. Well, that's resurrection on this myth. On this myth, it's talking about vegetation.
Okay, so no legitimate accounts reporting that they actually lived, and definitely no accounts saying that people had meals with them after they came back, and and put their hands on them and walked and talked with them like the accounts of Jesus.
Well, nothing like what we find in the Gospels. But I will tell you this. Some people do think there are some of those in mythology. The jury's out on whether there's any before Christ. And I'm not talking about what Christians are saying. I'm talking about debates between classical scholars. And here's where they all agree. Almost the best scholars say, no, there are none of those accounts. But some of them say there are. Here's where they all agree. Whether there are or they are not, there's no way they inspired the Christian stories of resurrection. Here's the main reason. Christians said he was raised and I saw him. He was raised and I saw him. That's different than saying, well, our guy was raised too. Yeah, well, our God was raised. Yeah, so was our guy. That just becomes a shouting contest like the earlier discussion about Muslim and Christian sources. But the Christian teaching is I saw him, not somebody said he was raised. I saw him. So everybody on both sides, do you think there's any of these stories? Everybody agrees they don't, they're not, no inspiration on the Christian accounts. And by the way, Bart Ehrman agrees. Bart Ehrman spends 20 pages in one of his books going off on these stories. I mean, really going off on them, making fun of them. And anybody who accepts them. So, and he's an atheist New Testament specialist.
Yeah, I've also seen, I guess the video documentation of Bart Ehrman going off on the Jesus mythers. The people that say Jesus never existed. Bart Ehrman says these people are not interested in being accurate.
Yeah, and he at the beginning of his book, he says there's like 10,000. I don't know what the figure is. There's thousands and thousands, he says, of people who teach religion, New Testament theology, and accredited colleges, universities, and seminaries all over this world. He said, I know a lot of them. I attend all the big meetings. I'm fairly well known. He says, I don't know a single one of them who say Jesus never lived.
Okay. All right. Another common skeptic question. Isn't it more plausible to believe something other than a resurrection to Jesus happened, since resurrections generally don't happen?
That's a good point. But the more you wonder if something happened, the more you can ask for good evidence. And the favorite skeptical byline is incredible claims and require credible evidence. I think there's incredible evidence for the resurrection. The reports are within a year. They came from eyewitnesses. This is admitted by the critics. The crucifixion had already occurred, believed to have occurred. You go, yeah, but see, nobody else rose from the dead. You could say, well, there was nobody else like Jesus. In the life of Jesus, there's about 8 areas that are utterly unique. There's no other religious founder who even did these things. No other founder of a major religion even claimed to be the Son of God, or God, none of them, or Lord, Lord in the sense of God. But when someone says, but yeah, resurrections are really odd, I would say, okay, time out. What about near-death experiences? Is there an afterlife? I'm telling you what, if you deny it, you're going to be in a corner real fast because the evidence is unbelievable. So if I already know there's an afterlife, and you believe this friend of yours who had a near-death experience, and let's just say you did some research and you know some really good ones, and you believe in an afterlife, if I go, well, let me tell you about a friend of mine. All right, let's hear it. Jesus raised from the dead. Oh, now you're getting all religious on me. No, I'm giving a testimony just like you accept with your friends. If there's already an afterlife, why would you? See, that's how you get a wedge in there. If there's already a God, he can raise the dead. Another angle, if there's already an afterlife, I'm only giving you an example with the resurrection. So if another world opens up, I've got to be open to the really good evidence that says that we're going to talk about what's in that world.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, I'll tell you what, how about we take a few-minute break, and for folks watching at home, this is an opportunity for you to take a break or to submit questions. Maybe your question that you've already submitted has not been asked yet. I promise to get to more questions after our break. But if you haven't submitted a question and some questions are rolling around in your head right now, please post a question, and I'll try to get it asked before we're done for the evening. So we'll just take a few-minute break, and we'll be back to ask more questions. I see you, Dave. I'll see if I can get that asked. All right, you good to go, Dr. Habermas?
I sure am.
All right. Yep. Your question's coming up, Colleen. I see you. All right. So next question, and this I think taps into some of your expertise regarding doubt. It says the Gospels mention several times that the disciples did not believe Jesus had risen from the grave. They had seen his many miracles. They knew the scriptures. Why the disbelief from those closest to him?
Well, I think that's a great question. But you know what? Well, let me start with something we can know about. In the 1970s, when I went to school, not very many critical scholars, as far as I remember, believed Jesus was a miracle worker. Today, I've heard critics say 100% of critics accept that Jesus is a miracle worker, or let's put it this way. They'll say 100% said that Jesus healed people, and that's pretty much unanimous among critics. All right, so that's major because people think that Jesus did those kind of things. But you could say, yeah, but why didn't they believe later? Because you know what? If you think Jesus is a miracle worker, that's pretty major. But resurrection is like utterly unique. The previous questioner hit that on the head. Why a resurrection? Yeah, well, they disbelieve because a resurrection is pretty strong. And you can find lack of belief in the Gospels. You can find there's a lot of stuff on doubts in the New Testament. And by the way, I mean, doubts are not necessarily bad. Doubts. Kevin, I just got an email from a person a few days ago. It was on Easter Sunday morning. And he said, I walked away from the Lord. I've been an unbeliever for years. And my buddies were skeptics. And he said, I just want to tell you something. He said, I became a Christian in 2018. And he said, the resurrection arguments totally convinced me. And he gets all the way down this email, and he says in the last line, he says, you know what got me the most? He says, I heard you say in an email that he said, I don't believe in inspiration. The guy who wrote me said, I don't believe in inspiration. He said, what really caught my attention is that you said, I don't have to believe in inspiration to get a resurrection. Now, I want to be clear. I do believe in the inspiration of the Testament. But his point, I say it oftentimes, that's not a prerequisite to believe in the resurrection. And he said, I tried your argument out, and I can get to resurrection without inspiration. So I became a Christian. And then he said, I want to apologize to you for all my atheist and skeptical friends who slam you on internet and YouTube and all over the place. And I said, well, that's awful nice of you. Why do you say that? He said, because I know these guys. And Kevin, it's the first time I've heard anybody say this. But he said, the guys I hung around with, they call you names and say things to you because it makes them feel good. And he was saying, they gain street cred. They gain street credibility for calling you names and saying things. Everybody sees how skeptical they are. He says, that's why they're doing it. He said, I can tell you from working with them for years. He said, they don't have a clue on how good the evidence for the resurrection is. And he became a Christian.
Wow.
So
awesome. There's a lot of nasty name calling out there.
That's what?
There's a lot of nasty name calling out in YouTube land.
Yeah. But here's what his email said on the little byline, on the little topic. He goes, I apologize to you. And I said, I don't even know who you are. Why are you apologizing to me? Because a lot of my friends have said horrible things about you, and I went along with that for years. And I'm just realizing these guys can't answer your arguments. I'm not saying look at me. I'm just saying that's an insider testimony. So,
okay, a question just popped up, and I don't want to move too far away from it. This is from Matt. How do we account for the differences in the order of appearances in the Creed in 1 Corinthians 15 and the Gospel accounts?
Well, yeah. Now, does he give an example of what he means?
No, but I was going to ask a follow-up question that'll come up a bit later, but I guess I can ask it now. What do you make of the differences in the Gospel accounts?
Well, okay, let me deal with both of them. What's really missing, this is what I thought he would say, what's really missing is the Gospels are unanimous that the first people to find the empty tomb are women. Even though men go back to the tomb later, they all start with the story of the women going there because they beat the disciples. Okay. Paul in the Creed, it's not Paul. Remember, Paul said, I gave you what I was given. It's not Paul's account, but he's repeating somebody else's. There's no women's report there. Why not? Because in the ancient world, not just, that's those Jews, they're always cheating on women. No, around the Mediterranean, as one female New Testament scholar says, that was the view of women around the Mediterranean. Don't cite a woman if you can cite a man. That was the view. Then why do all four guys, they weren't looking over each other's shoulders. Why do all four guys start with the women? Because that's what happened. Yeah, but you're not putting your best foot forward. You're not hearing me. That's what happened. So they put their honesty ahead of what gives. Now, if you go to Paul's list in 1 Corinthians 15, the women aren't there. So if they go, why are they out of order? Scholars think it's because they didn't want to start with the women. It's not a lie. It's not a contradiction. They just decided to leave certain witnesses out. They left the women out. Why? Because they got no, to use the phrase I used a little while ago, they got no street cred for using the women. They start with Peter.
Okay.
All right. Luke, for one, tells us.
Another.
You asked the other question about, what was it about? Why?
The differences in, let's see, I got it up on my from a previous questioner. Do variations in the resurrection accounts discredit the resurrection?
The short, it's going to depend on what the guy's asking, how he means that. But let me just make it. Interpret it in the really liberal way. Are there disagreements in the Gospels? Yes. I'm just saying it straight out. Yes. Do differences equal contradictions? No. Why not? A lot of critics, whenever they say a difference, they call that a contradiction. But a definition of a contradiction is that two things cannot both be and not be in the same time, same place, in the same manner. What if you did something on Tuesday and I accuse you of doing something different, but you pointed out to me that now you're talking about Thursday, and Tuesday's not Thursday? That's not the same time, same place, same manner. Okay, let me say something really what will strike people. I told you about this testimony that I got from this guy in Easter, and he said, I don't believe in inspiration. And I heard you say, I don't have to believe in inspiration to believe in Jesus. And he said, I do. He said, I believe he's the Son of God, died on the cross for my sins, and was raised from the dead. He said, I definitely am a Christian. I'm going to an evangelical church now, but I don't believe in inspiration. Okay, so we talked about that for a little while. But here's the point I want to make. Just like you don't have to believe in inspiration to believe in the resurrection, you can believe there's a bunch of contradictions in the gospel. Let's just say that. Let's just say you privately think there's a lot of contradictions in the Gospels. But what's the minimal facts argument? The minimal facts it's not an all or nothing. Unless you give me all the Gospels, I'm not talking to you. It's nothing like that. I'm going to use your facts. Bart Ehrman's, Gert Ludemann, Pinchas Lapid, Geza Vermesh. I'm going to use their facts. And if I use their data and you go, well, yeah, but there's a contradiction over here. I know that. I don't believe it's a contradiction, but to use your example, that's why I'm not citing that. Oh, that's easy. You're not citing the rough text. You're not hearing me. If I can prove my case with verses that everybody agrees to, why would I cite verses that a lot of people disagree on? Well, because that adds up. No, it doesn't. It doesn't add up. If the atheists allow A and B, but you think A and B are contradicted by Y and Z, the atheist still accepts A and B. He knows Y and Z are there, whatever he thinks about them, But if he can get to A and B without those, the issue is he still gets the facts. Now, we're not asking him to believe in inspiration. We're asking him to believe in the resurrection. So differences just don't amount to a hill of beans. They really don't. It's a moot objection. It's totally a moot point because my argument is not based on any text that's 50-50, 60-40. Nothing like that. I'm going to use the text that 90% of scholars, even unbelievers, are going to use, and that satisfies the resurrection. So, do whatever you want with the rest of them.
Okay, great. You want me to keep backing up a little bit, but don't want to get too far past some of the questions we already asked. There's a question on the Facebook page. It says, what types of evidence would be most convincing to our Orthodox Jewish friends? And that comes from Dave Havoc.
Our Orthodox what, friends?
What types of evidence would be most convincing to our Orthodox Jewish friends?
Well, okay. I'll tell you what. I'm looking right now. I'm looking up on my shelf. I see 3 books next to each other. One of them is by a New Testament guy, Pinchas Lapid, with a PhD in New Testament. He's not a Christian, but he believes the resurrection happened. Right next to it is a guy named Geza Vermesh, an Oxford historian till he passed away. And he does a book called Resurrection. He's kind of agnostic about whether the resurrection occurred, but he admits all the data. But he's not a Christian. But he admits all the data. But he doesn't try to disprove it. In fact, he says all the naturalistic theories, somebody stole the body, there were hallucinations, he says they're all wet. This is a Jewish guy, Jewish historian. He says they're all wet. So what would I do with an Orthodox Jewish scholar? I would say, let's look at some Orthodox Jewish scholars and let's see what they do with the data. And you're still going to have a hard time explaining these facts away because everybody concedes them. Okay. They don't just say, I buy it. They buy it because there's good evidence. I don't cite things that's a popularity contest. I cite things that the reason it's popular to believe it is because the facts say you should believe it.
Okay, and when you say facts, you're talking about most probable, beyond reasonable doubt. You're not talking about geometry facts.
Right, because listen, let's not shock people, but a whole scientific enterprise. Can we cure cancer? Can we get to the moon? Is there such a thing as gravity? Name any scientific rule you want to. They're all only probabilistic. No, none of those scientific rules, we don't have proof for any of them. Oh, yeah, we do. What's proof on your definition? Something that we believe so strongly you'd be stupid not to believe it. But we don't have 100% certainty for it. Oh, no, that's 99.7. Okay, good. But that's not proof. Science is highly probable, and history is highly probable. I'm using highly probable historical rules.
Okay. And that's inference to the best explanation is what I hear often from historians?
Yeah. Well, that's not the only rule they use. They use induction, too.
Okay.
But induction is like what science uses. Yeah, I take either one of them.
Okay. All right. Great. Next question. How reliable would you say are the New Testament accounts of the resurrection? You touched upon it. If you would just speak briefly to it again.
I think they're all reliable. I think I got asked the other day in an interview, what is the best of the appearances? Which is the strongest one? I would say it's the appearance to the 12 disciples. I would say 12. Judas went out and committed suicide, but for those who read the book of Acts, Matthias took his place, so we still have 12. And besides, it was just a name. Like if 3 of them were martyred, I'm sure they still called them the 12 because it was a name. So I think the best one is that the 12 disciples saw Jesus at one time. Now, that's not the only group appearance. In 1 Corinthians 15, there's 3 group appearances. But I think the best attested one is the 12 saw him. Well, when you go, well, what are the facts for the 12? There's really good data for the 12. John Dominic Crossan of the Jesus Seminar, as skeptical of groups as there are in the New Testament work today, they both say there's multiple sources for the 12. I take the appearance of the 12 because the evidence is so good, but some of that's in Luke and John. So, but the best evidence for it is in 1 Corinthians 15. We're back to that creed again. That's the best evidence for the appearance to the disciples.
And just to be clear, I've heard you say before that the best evidence for the resurrection is actually pre-New Testament.
Yes, if you mean by pre-New Testament, if you mean the creeds. Yes, the creeds predate the New Testament. They're cited later. Here's an example. If I'm writing an essay in 2020, and I'm doing a paper on physics, and I quote a scholar who published his work in 2008. The source is 2008, but when I copy it, it's 2020. Now let's say, well, yeah, but I can get his 2008 book. Okay, what if I give you his 2008 email? I just saw a major scholar quote an email. It's listed in his footnote. Here's an email, and you can take it off my server. You can get it off his server. It's there. So anyway, if I cite something in 2020, but my source is 2008, 2008 is when the source comes out. And that's how the creeds are. They're in the very early New Testament books, but they predate the New Testament books. By the way, the very earliest New Testament books are Paul's epistles, not the Gospels. The Paul's epistles fill that gap between Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. Paul's epistles are way earlier than the earliest gospel. So a lot of people who don't know that go, when are your earliest sources? The creeds from the first 2 years. Some other sources like this Mark and Passion narrative, we talked about that earlier. The John miracles narrative, that's earlier in the Gospels. Paul's epistles start in 50 AD. That's only 20 years later. So we've got a lot of really early sources.
All right, next questions are more of the quick hitting variety, kind of a 1 minute response.
Oh boy.
Speed round. Was Jesus dead on the cross?
Oh, wow. You asked me. Hey, in my magnum opus, I've got 3 chapters on that total about 150 pages. But we can say it in a minute.
Sorry about that.
Let me give you 2 in 1 minute. The descriptions of death by crucifixion. It is a kind of death, and I'll let you tell me if you want more evidence. That's on your time. The first reason, I'll give you 2. The first one, Roman soldiers did not have to have medical degrees to know if somebody was dead on the cross, because the most common view on what happens on the cross, not the only view, but the most common view, is that you die by asphyxiation. If you slump on the low part of the cross and you can't get back up again, it's like saying, if your life depended on pull-ups, how long would you live? Well, if you can pull yourself up, you can breathe. If you're in the low on the cross for any amount of time, and by the way, in experiments, that mark is 12 minutes. If you're down 12 minutes, they lose consciousness. They've actually done these experiments. They're nasty, but they've asked for volunteers. So a Roman soldier can see that you're down low. If you're down low for like a half hour, it's over because you can't breathe. Okay, next reason. David Strauss, an unbeliever, a very famous German unbeliever in the 19th century. He died without believing in God or an afterlife. He said the problem with not believing Jesus died on the cross is a logical problem, not a medical problem. He said if Jesus was beaten up like Jesus was beaten up, if he were nailed through the arms, if he were nailed through the feet, if he got stabbed, if he didn't get stabbed, who cares? He's beat up first. He is in bad shape. If you're crucified on Friday afternoon and you start walking around on Sunday and you have been beaten up, you ever step on a nail? I mean, I've done it over a half dozen times. I stepped on nails. It's hard to walk 3 days later. And if he's hurt badly, which crucifixion, by any definition, crucifixion hurts you bad. He comes to where the disciples are. And what's he look like? We had a phrase in the 60s called death warmed over. Dude, you look like death warmed over. You look like you died and the cat dragged you in. You know, we use phrases like that. Here's what happens. If Jesus didn't die, but he appeared to his disciples, here's the problem. they would know he was alive. They probably even thank the Lord. Thank you for sparing him. Yeah, he's beat all up badly, but you spared him. Thank the Lord, you spared him. Okay, what do you get out of the theory that he didn't die on the cross? You get a beat up, just about dead, dude, you look horrible theory. You're living, but you look horrible. What don't you get? Oh, this is the crucified and risen Lord of life. That's what David Strauss said. But the disciples, everybody agrees. Every skeptic who's a scholar believes that the disciples thought Jesus was raised. If there's no resurrection, as Paul says, if there's no resurrection, there's no faith. What do you get from a faked or not even faked? What do you get from a botched crucifixion? Life. What do you not get? Resurrection. That guy, I'll tell you what, the guy who got off the cross, he's still alive. He's not raised. I'm happy he's alive, but he's not raised. So what the swoon theory gives you is not anything that would cause Christianity, because they would say he's alive and God answered my prayer and we nursed him back to health by God's power. But you wouldn't say we saw the crucified and risen Lord of life and he had eternal life, offered it to us, and someday we're going to go live in the kingdom with him. That does not come from the swoon theory.
Gotcha.
That's as good as I can do for 1 minute.
All right. All right. How often do group hallucinations happen, where they hallucinate the same thing?
All right. I have quoted and co-authored with a couple of guys. One, a good friend of mine that Pastor Kevin knows. He is a clinical psychologist here in the Lynchburg area. He not only is a professor, used to run the PhD counseling program, but he works in a psychiatric hospital where he deals with pretty rough cases. He's a clinical psychologist. He's one of them. The other one is a medical doctor, a friend of mine. And we published an article together in a prestigious European journal. The psychologist did a psychological study, and the medical doctor did a study of medical cases. They both checked the literature, as you can use public materials in the library and say, are there any sources that do this, and this? And the psychologist said there's not a single psychological or psychiatric source that says we don't have any clear cases. We don't have any like experiment or something where a group saw an hallucination. Medical doctor said we don't have a single case. And I think they both went back like 25 years. We don't have a single case of a group hallucination. Now, the issue in the Gospels is that we have several group appearances, several. In the appearance in 1 Corinthians 15, you have three right off the bat. Remember, Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, was buried, rose again according to the scriptures, and appeared. And 5 appearances are mentioned, and then Paul tacks his name on the end. But of the 5 that are mentioned, 3 of them are groups. He appeared to a group called the 12. He appeared to a group called all the apostles, which people believe is bigger than the 12. And then he appeared to a group called the 500. That's 3 groups in the earliest. So now you go, is that the one from 1 year after? Yep. Is that the one that they got from eyewitnesses? Yep. Were they all there? Well, they're named in that group. And they all saw Jesus together? Yeah. So that's not a story that got bigger with telling. No, because they were there. And yeah, how do we know they weren't lying? Because all 3 of them, we have first century sources for their martyrdoms. We don't always have sources for martyrdoms. We have theirs. Yeah, so we can trace back the group appearances, and the group appearance is really, really difficult on hallucinations. In fact, there's none known from the case histories.
Okay, so there's no naturalistic theories that carry much weight today.
In fact, I'll tell you how true that is. Most critics, not the guys that think Jesus never lived, and they live in their parents' basement, and they say they're scholars, and they haven't done anything but, go off on people. That's pretty mean, but there's a fair, like I said, I've got 2 sources now from guys who came from that group and said, I'm not one of these mean atheists. I'm not one of these angry, is what they said, angry atheists. I'll just let them talk. They're the skeptics. Well, the critics, no, there aren't, today, almost no critic will give you a theory and stick by it. They'll do this. Why couldn't this have happened? Oh, because of that, and that. Okay. Why couldn't have this one happened? That, and that. Wow, pretty cool. All right. Why couldn't this one have? What I mean is they'll go down the list and do any of them, but they don't really stand and die on any kind of ground. I'm going to stand here. You can't move me. Either I'm going to get a home run or the game's going to be over. I got to hit this. I got to hit this shot with 2 seconds left or the game's over. They don't do that anymore. They don't take a theory and say, I'm standing here, live or die, I'm standing here. Most well-known skeptics don't pick these theories. They don't take them by and large.
So a lot of emotional doubt, what if?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you know what I thought you were going to ask? Maybe the most common question I get today is this one. Well, if this case is as good as you think it is, how come everybody's not believing? Well, it's really simple. Let me ask you a question. If you're my best friend and you're not married, and I think married people are happier, so I want you to be married, and you're my best friend, so I introduce you to this person who's the greatest person in the world, and I go, hey, you just get to know him a little bit, you're going to want to get married. All right, I hate blind dates, but I'll try it. And you go out. You come back, and I go, what'd you think? Man, that person's special. Just like you said, hey, can I be your best man? But now look, man, we're best friends, but let me explain something to you. Meeting a good friend and wanting to say I do are two different things. I like best friends. I don't like marriage. And you could say anything. Well, why not? I don't know. My parents never did very well. Or this guy I know, bad things happen when you get married. I think they could say whatever they wanted to. But a great bunch of dates does not equal you be my best man or we're going to get married. Why don't they get married? Because that's not their cup of tea. Why don't people believe? I don't know. They're very angry. I just gave you 2 examples of a former unbeliever and a present atheist who said, I'm not one of those angry atheists. Maybe they're very, very angry. Maybe they were hurt. Maybe Christians are to blame for what happened to them. Maybe their pastor had an affair and they're sick and tired of people asking for money and then they take the money and run. I don't know. Things happen to people, but everyone who has good experience with somebody isn't ready to get married. And that's a good example because I do think, I've said, I started right at the beginning of our interview tonight. I really do think saying yes to Jesus is like saying yes in marriage. It's making a commitment. And they're not ready for it. They're not the committing kind. They might say this, if you ask me if I play golf, I'd say, yeah, when I'm 80 years old, or if golf has body contact. Either way, if you want to play tackle football, what's that movie where the golf was the tackle football?
Was that Happy Gilmore?
Happy Gilmore. Yeah, if you want to play golf that way, I'm your man. Otherwise, I'm going to wait till I'm 80. That's not my cup of tea. Okay. I can be convinced something's really cool, but that doesn't mean I'm going to invest in it. It doesn't mean I'm going to say I do. So Everybody has their own reasons for not wanting to enter a relationship.
Yeah, my wife, she's probably watching at home. She might be laughing a little bit right now because it took me a while, as you know, to commit before I got married.
Yeah. Well, just like it took you a little while to go to college, it took you a little while to get rid of your doubts. Hey, listen, I'm there with you. I told you I was still having doubts in my 20s after I got my PhD, so It happens.
All right, this question comes from Big Red out in Colorado.
All right.
Let's see. Why is it considered 3 days when Jesus died on Friday and resurrected on Sunday?
Okay, first of all, if this makes Big Red feel good, he doesn't have to take Friday. Now, virtually every New Testament scholar, believer or non-believer, thinks Friday is the day. But if he likes Thursday, go for it. You like Wednesday? Go for it. If that makes you feel better, do it, because it doesn't tell you what day. But when you work it out, it comes to Friday. So he says, all right, cool. Then I got my problem. Jesus said 3 days and 3 nights. Why is that not 3 days and 3 nights? Okay. In the book of Esther, we can unpack this. But in Esther 4, she asks the Jews, her fellow Jews, to pray and fast And she says, in 3 days and 3 nights, I'm going to go in and see the king. And she said, I might die because you couldn't go in and see the king without permission. She said, I'm going to go in anyway. So she said, 3 days and 3 nights, you fast, and I'm going to go in. They commit to fasting for 3 days and 3 nights. And on the third day, she goes in. Now, you do the math. 3 days and 3 nights. What do you want to call it? Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And Saturday, Sunday, and Monday nights. That's 3 days and 3 nights. But if you go in on the third day, Monday, you're not going to get the third day and the third night in. So what scholars think is 3 days and 3 nights is a Jewish idiom. We have all kinds of things we say in English that when people are trying to learn English, the phrase doesn't make any sense. Like, for example, in the New Testament, the phrase flesh and blood, this or that. Jesus says to Peter, who am I? And he said, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And he said, Peter, you didn't say that on your own. You didn't get that from flesh and blood. The Father gave it to you. Well, that's a saying for, you didn't get that for any man. Flesh and blood means, or if you say, give me a little bit of skin. Well, somebody gives you a high five. That doesn't mean they left your finger in their hand. You know, we've got these little phrases that are not true. And in Esther, there's also an example in 1 Samuel where 3 days and 3 nights do not equal. In fact, you know what some of the scholars say? They say that you can't get 3 days and 3 nights, no matter what day, if he died at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. If he died at 3 o'clock, you can't get 3 days and 3 nights unless on the third day at 3 o'clock, he's raised. Now you got 3 days and 3 nights, maybe. But he died real early. He rose real early in the morning. The women, it was dark when they left the building. It was light when they got to the tomb. We know about what time that is in the Middle East in Jerusalem. You can't get 3 days and 3 nights and rise in the morning. Not if he died at 3 o'clock. So you're not going to help yourself by getting Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. It's a Jewish idiom, and I give you 2 Old Testament examples. One is compare Esther 4 with Esther 5. 3 days and 3 nights does not literally mean 3 days and 3 nights, right in the text.
So not 3 24-hour days.
Correct. And not nights. If she goes in on the third day, you're not going to get that night, and you're not going to get the whole day. Go, maybe it's the next day. Yeah, well, now, number one, you violated the text. The text says it was the third day she went in. But if you go on the next day, now it's 3.5 days. So it's not 3 days. The question is, why don't we have exactly 3 days? Whatever it is, your timing is going to be off. If you rose at 6 o'clock in the morning, but you died at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, take whatever day you want. You won't get 3.5 days. So that shows it's an idiom. It's a saying. Give me some skin. Give me 5. You know, those are idioms. Flesh and blood didn't reveal that to you. Those are things that locals who know the language would know what you mean, and they'd laugh and walk away. But you'd be going, give me some skin. What? You know, and they wouldn't get it. Those are idioms.
Yeah. All right. How about where was Jesus from the time he died on the cross until the resurrection?
Well, hey, that's an interesting question. Some traditions, and it's not necessarily according to whether you're Baptist or Pentecostal or Methodist or Catholic or Greek Orthodox. It's not necessarily according to groups. Some are more prone to believe than others. But in the Disciples' Creed, and there's even 2 forms of the Disciples' Creed, but it says, and the Disciples' Creed is real early. It probably goes back to the 2nd century. But Disciples' Creed said he was in the heart of the earth. And that 3 days and 3 nights prophecy says as Jonah was in the great fish, so will the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth. So some people think he went and preached to whatever he preached about. He preached to the spirits in prison. He preached to imprisoned souls. Others equally believe that Jesus was in paradise. He was in a really good place, but he doesn't come out till Sunday. Because remember, he says to the thief on the cross, today you will be with me in paradise. Now, he could be both places. He could have gone and preached under the earth and still gone to paradise. He's got a couple days there to do it. You can go to more than one place in 2 days, from Friday to Sunday. But in other words, some people think he went to the center of the earth. Some people would say, never in your life. That's not what happened. And they don't like that middle of the earth thing. But there's a couple options for you. He went and preached. And it also says he'll be with the the thief in paradise. So paradise, I guess your best options, paradise plus the heart of the earth or paradise alone. Those are the two views.
Okay. All right. Now this next question gets back to just some of the reporting of Jesus's life. Let me see if I can. All right. Can you speak about the most reliable sources outside of the New Testament that have accounts of the life of Jesus, his crucifixion, and his resurrection?
Yeah, really interesting. I wrote a book. One of the key chapters that answer that question is on my website, GaryHabermas.com. I wrote a book called The Historical Jesus. You go to my website, I sell nothing on my website. Nothing's for sale. But I have a couple chapters there, and one of them is this chapter. And I ask, what do we know about Jesus from outside history in the first 150 years? And I come up with a list. I think it's 50-something facts from secular sources alone and 129 facts from Christian and secular sources within that amount of time. But it's 50-something, and not open the New Testament, not open a Christian source, just use secular sources, and you get over 50 incidents in Jesus' life and in the very earliest church, what they believed about Jesus. Now, as far as resurrection, here's a couple intriguing things. Josephus, pretty much scholars believe, Josephus reports not the resurrection, but that the disciples believed they saw the risen Jesus. Nothing wrong with saying, if I'm not a Hindu, but I say Hindus believe Krishna was, holy, I'm not doing anything wrong by saying I'm telling the truth. Hindus believe, at least some Hindus believe, Krishna is holy. So if Josephus says, who was Jewish, if he says the disciples reported Jesus appeared to them, I think he says 3 days later, by the way. But if he reports that the disciples thought they saw him, there's a non-Christian source. Here's another one for you. Kevin, I know you have some interest in this topic. What about the Shroud of Turin?
Yeah, that question was coming up from Amanda in Pennsylvania.
Oh,
yeah, can you speak to that?
Yeah, hey, the biggest news on the Shroud is that going back to, I wrote 2 co-authored books in the Shroud, and my co-author, Ken Stevenson, was a member of the Shroud team that did the famous investigation in 1978. And he went over to Turin. They took thousands of photographs and thousands of tests. And a lot of really interesting things turned out. Barry Schwartz, by the way, who's probably the best known Shroud guy today, he's got the fantastic website, shroud.com. Easy to remember, shroud.com. Barry is Jewish. I don't know what kind of Jewish, but he's Jewish. And his dad, I remember him saying, is an Orthodox Jew. Was an Orthodox Jew. What's Barry's view? Barry's view is that the Shroud wrapped a man who was crucified named Jesus Christ. The image was not faked. There's no paint, dye, powder, or foreign substance on the Shroud that can account for the image. That was the conclusion of the Shroud team from 78. It's not faked. It is Jesus. This is Barry Schwartz. It is Jesus. It's not faked. I don't know how the image got there. The most prominent view is that the image on the cloth is radiation. And one of the earliest books, I'm looking at it up there. What the earliest book said, the Shroud image could be a photograph of the resurrection of Jesus. What do you mean? A radiograph, an X-ray is a photograph? Well, if you're playing baseball and you break your leg, you said, I went to the hospital, had to get a photograph of my leg. You mean X-ray as in a photograph. And it's a photograph of your bones, not necessarily of your birthmark. But it's a photograph. The most common view is that the person buried, there are hundreds of shrouds in existence, but none of them have, a lot of them have decomposition, a lot of them have blood. None of them have body images where you have an outline of a body. The man in the shroud is crucified, and all the data was plus. Now, Barry has told me, he said, well, Gary, I'm going to tell you, it could be the resurrection. I hope it's not. I hope they come up with another view because I'm Jewish. But they might come up with an X-ray and that's the final view. Could be. All right, that's him. But that's an extra biblical source. So what I was going to say was, until recently, about the only major negative argument was the carbon-14 that was done in 1988, and they dated it to the Middle Ages. Well, just recently, matter of fact, last October, less than, what is that, 6 months ago? About 6 months ago, the carbon-14 was exploded. Now, they didn't do a new carbon-14 test. All they did was explode the one they got in 88. And what they did was, Freedom of Information Act, they applied a team of four scholars. Two of them, I think, were PhDs in statistics. Freedom of Information, they got all the dates in the three labs, Oxford, Arizona, and in Switzerland. And they saw all these dates, and the dates were all over the place. They were very widely divergent. And the conclusion from the statisticians is, hey, look, you got a problem here. We don't know what the date on the shroud is, but it's not the date you all came up with, because you can't just take a bunch of divergent dates and average them. You can't do that. When you get this widely divergent data, you got to start over again. So the only major negative argument has now been exploded. Not to say what it is, but to say what it isn't. And by the way, there was an 82. There was another test that didn't get much press way back in the day, as they say. And the shroud came up. I've heard different dates for it, but the shroud came up to somewhere between 30 and 100-ish AD, with a normal plus or minus 100 or plus or minus 50 or whatever it is. So I didn't prove anything, but the shroud, I would think the shroud is probably the best extra biblical data. If it's Jesus, which Barry Schwartz believes it is, what you'd have there is death, burial, maybe a resurrection on that cloth.
So I've heard you say this before about the shroud. To your knowledge, there's no technology even today that could reproduce the image that's on the shroud.
That's correct. You can lock people in the room with any scientific thing they want. You can make an image that looks to the naked eye. Many have tried. You can make an image which to the naked eye looks like, oh, how much does that look like the shroud? Well, it's kind of right like it. But they do a chemical test on it, not the shroud. They do a physical test on it, not the shroud. Looks like the shroud, but has totally different characteristics. So every time someone's tried to fake it and they had enough guts to send it into the scientists, it's been disproven. Because they know what the chemistry and the physics of the shroud are, because they took thousands of non-destructive tests on the shroud itself. These guys handled it for days and took ultraviolet, infrared, about anything you can do on the shroud except destroy it.
They can't reproduce it. Okay.
Can't reproduce it.
Well, do you think this question is fair from a skeptic? Since the resurrection is such a big event, why aren't there more non-Christian accounts, since this is such a big deal?
Yeah, but what are we looking for? I mean, the shroud would be as big as there is if it's the true thing, because you'd have empirical, repeatable data that meets scientific criteria if we can pull this thing off. And Barry Schwartz thinks, it's come a long way. But what would we prove if there were 5? Then a real skeptic, if you want to be a real hardhead, you could say, yeah, well, I want 10. All right, I'm working hard. I'm working all my life. I found 10. Yeah, I really need 15. What I mean is you can always move the goalposts. Do I wish there were more? Listen, there's a way better argument to that, and it's Bart Ehrman's argument. Back to the atheists, Ludemann, Ehrman, Pinchas Lapid, Gaze of Ramesh, the 2 Jews and the New Atheist New Testament scholars. They would say, sure, it'd be nice if we could prove the shroud, but you've got the New Testament, and I'm not going to assume inspiration, they would say. But I'm going to use, like the spider, I'm going to use the strands that are most reliable, that'll hold me up and won't catch me. I'm going to use only the best evidence. And the best evidence in the New Testament. Skeptics are going to say that. Skeptical scholars are going to say the best evidence in the New Testament. We've got plenty. Remember, James was not a believer before he before he saw the risen Jesus. Paul was not a believer before he saw the risen Jesus. According to the book of John, Thomas said, I won't believe until I see him. You made the question yourself earlier, or your questioner did, that we see more cases of doubt in the Gospels than there are Gospels. And it's common to ask questions. And that's not the end of the world. It's common to ask questions. So critics, Bart Ehrman is going to say the New Testament's the best source. You know what? Bart Ehrman gives 15 independent sources for the crucifixion. That's another answer to your friend who said, well, the Quran says it's wrong. Bart Ehrman says, yeah, but the Quran 600 years later, I've got 15 independent sources for death by crucifixion within my prescribed distance after the cross. And he's an atheist.
Okay. All right. I got, I think, two more questions. One about the Case for Christ movie.
Oh, yeah.
Is the movie and book A Case for Christ about the conversion of Lee Strobel a reliable resource to the references regarding the historical facts of the resurrection? That comes from Adam McKinney.
Well, I will paraphrase. Actually, it's pretty close to a quote. I'll quote Lee Strobel and what he told me. Lee Strobel wrote the book, but Lee Strobel did not make the movie. Somebody else made the movie. And there's a guy playing Lee. There's a guy playing me. There's a guy playing William Lane Craig. And I said to Lee one day what he and I both knew. But the movie depicts William Lane Craig and I talking to Lee and answering his questions. Lee went on like a 2-year search, a skeptical search. He was a hardcore atheist, hardcore. And like C.S. Lewis. And he went on a 2-year source. He read a 2-year study. He went to a bunch of scholars. Now, the movie guys decided to let Bill Craig and Gary Habermas, or more accurately, the actors that played us, he let us represent the guys Bill went to. But we didn't know Bill before he was a Christian. So I said to Bill one time, yeah, Bill, I already know what you're gonna, not Bill. I said to Lee Strobel, Lee, I already know what you're gonna say. I know we didn't meet you before you became a Christian. But why in the movie do we come before? And he said, I didn't make the movie. But he said the movie's about 80% accurate. It's pretty accurate. One of the guys he meets, Hugh Metherell, the guy's an MD, PhD in physics, MD in medicine, if I remember. And I think Metherell is one of the scholars. He's in the movie. He is one of the scholars that Lee visited while he was searching. So the searching happened, and him going to good scholars happened. But since Bill and I have done a lot of writing on the resurrection, Bill Craig and I have done a lot of writing on the resurrection, they stuck us in there, poetic license, to let us represent the people that Lee went and talked to. So his own comment is about 80% accurate. Okay.
All right. And Dr. Habermas, I think this is our last question for tonight.
All right.
For the sports fans out there who might be able to measure your judgment a little bit by your answer here. Who would be your all-time NBA starting five?
Well, I'm not crazy about the NBA, but I probably could. I mean, I don't watch it because they're too good, frankly. They're just too good. They score too many buckets. I love college football, basketball. If I took, oh, man, can I use guys out of position can I use a center to play power forward?
I'll tell you what, you can give me your top 5 guys out of position, and I kind of wasn't honest with you. You can also tell us your top hockey players too, because I know that's more in your field of interest.
No, I'd be okay. I'd be okay in basketball. Okay. I'd have to think about this, and I might be wrong on a few of these. I'm going to say best center is going to be a choice between Wilt Chamberlain and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Honorable mention to Shaquille O'Neal, but I'm going to say I might go with Wilt Chamberlain. The only problem is he lived when there weren't a lot of big guys to go against. So Chamberlain, and I know Russell's up there, but I think Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or Wilt Chamberlain. Best power forward, probably Karl Malone. Karl Malone, and if you want another one, now you tell me, Kevin. Is Dr. J, is he a 3 or is he a 4?
I'd probably put him at a 3, but I'm still trying to get over your power forward pick when you don't put Tim Duncan there.
Oh, okay. Then if I'm going to go 2, I'll take Karl Malone or Tim Duncan. That's great. If you're going to go Dr. J as a 3, all right, then I'll say Dr. J for the 3 spot, which is the small forward, the shooting forward. He's small forward, he's 6'8". Let me come back to a second guy there, but I like Karl Malone. Guard, absolutely Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan. So Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan. And, by the way, if I do it that way, I guess I could put someone's going to say Kobe, but I'm going to put who should I put at the other 3 position? Probably I left out.
What about LeBron?
That's what I was going to say. I'll move LeBron into the either first string or second string for that last position with Dr. J. So 2 guys for every position. Wilt and Kareem, Tim Duncan. That's a great one. Tim Duncan and Karl Malone, LeBron and Dr. J, and I will take Magic and Jordan for the 2 guards. So I could pick 2 more guards. I like Jerry West a lot for a guard.
You like the logo?
No, I used to be an LA Lakers fan. Now I don't like them so much, but I used to be. I'll go with those guys right there. That's not bad.
Okay. And tell me your top hockey line.
Oh boy. I'm a Bobby Hull fan, and the problem with Bobby Hull is that Ovechkin is just past him, and he's a left winger. It's amazing that Bobby Hull played in the 60s, and up until just recently, if you pick Ovechkin, it's amazing that Bobby Hull has been the best left winger on everybody's list from the 60s up until 2018 or 2019 or 2020. I'd like to say Bobby Hull. When Gordie Howe died, even Wayne Gretzky said he was the best player of all time. I guess I'd have to say Gordie Howe on right wing. I would take Wayne Gretzky at center with an honorable mention to Mario Lemieux. On D, best defenseman of all time, I'm going to say for sure Bobby Orr on defense. Nobody like him. And you can pick anybody you want for the other one. Coffey.
We go Paul
Coffey. Yeah, Paul Coffey for the other defensemen. They're both offensive, he and Orr, but they're so good offensive that you're not going to get the puck from. So they're going to be playing defense because they're going to be scoring on you. So I'll take Bobby Orr and Paul Coffey. Goalie, best goalie. I'm not going to go with the goalies that usually people pick, like Brodeur or Waugh. Who should I pick? I'm a Blackhawk. I like Glenn Hall from the old days. I like Tony Esposito from the Blackhawks.
Is he wearing a mask?
I like Ken Dryden from the Tony O did. Ken Dryden from Montreal Canadiens. Those would be my goalie picks.
Okay. Fair enough. I'll let the viewing audience determine if your judgment is solid on that one.
Yeah, they're going to determine how I am on the resurrection based on how they like my NBA and hockey lineups. That's a good question, though. Those are good questions.
You know how that works. Well, hey, Dr. Habermas, I did want to. Hey, I don't know if people watching know that you coached Liberty University's hockey team for about 9 years.
I did. I was a head coach for 9 years. I had assistants, mostly my own players, who took over as assistant after they ended. But we were good. Liberty's team was, unfortunately, I think Liberty's team ended up this year number 2 in the nation. And late in the season, we beat the number 1 team. They had beaten us twice earlier, but small college in Michigan, they beat us twice early. We beat them twice late on our home ice. But the amazing thing is they were undefeated. As far as I remember, we gave them their only losses of the year. But they still ended up number 1, and we ended up number 2, I believe. That's pretty high. Our women, am I right? I think our women, if there had been a playoff, I think our women might have won the 3rd or 4th national championship in a row, the women's hockey team.
Wow.
So there's good hockey at Liberty.
All right. So if you're watching at home, you may have heard me mention it earlier. Dr. Habermas will have a YouTube channel forthcoming, so you can see more of his videos, and he'll share his expertise and answer some questions if you want to go for a deeper dive. And I just want to say thank you, Dr. Habermas, for this time. Thank you for all the work that you've put in to encourage those of us who follow Jesus Christ and to provide some challenging information to those skeptics.
Hey, Kevin, I got a question for you. How far are you going to disagree with me on my NBA team? Wilt and Kareem, Malone, and I'll go with your Duncan, Dr. J and LeBron, and I only gave 2 guards. Gotta be Jordan and Magic at guard.
Yeah, I'll agree with Magic and Jordan. I'll go 3 LeBron.
All right.
I'll go Tim Duncan at power forward.
Good.
And I'll go with man. See, I'm not old enough. I know my dad saw Wilt Chamberlain play in person in high school and in the pros. But
he was absolutely dominating. But of course, he didn't play a lot of big guys. So
yeah. So I liked your order for center. I liked Wilt, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Shaquille O'Neal. I would not put Karl Malone in that top 5. That's probably the biggest disagreement that I have with you.
All right.
Great player.
Hey, what did he end up? Was he was number 2 or 3 leading scorer in the NBA when he retired?
I want to say 2 behind Abdul-Jabbar.
Right. And
I know Kobe was right there. I'm sure some people can fact check us real quick on that. So, but yeah.
I guess I like Karl Malone. You know, my main reason, he played like a hockey player. That's my main reason for liking him.
Yeah, great player. Did not get the title, but great player. And you mentioned Julius Erving. Certainly, I'm a huge fan, being from Philly, but I don't know. I don't think I would put him in the top 5.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. How about John Stockton at guard? Is he in the running?
I wouldn't put him close to Magic. I think he's obviously a Hall of Fame.
No, not Magic or Jordan. No.
Yeah, he's a
Jerry West. Jerry West.
Yeah, Jerry West. The logo was before my time. I know he was a great player. I would not put him in the top 5, just because I think the 3, Magic, Jordan, and LeBron, I think would be a tough 3 to penetrate.
I think they're probably the 3 best players of all time.
I would agree with you there.
I don't want to tell you this, a very, very bad memory for you, but when the LA Lakers won the championship against Philadelphia many years ago, I will always remember when Magic was a rookie, Kareem got hurt, they put him at center. Julius, who was a very magnanimous person, yeah. Dr. J said before the game, we're both about 6'8". He's a rookie. I know the guy's good, but you know what? All the marbles are here, and I'm going to show you what's going on. And I think Magic scored 42 points, and Dr. J got 25-ish. And he badly outplayed Dr. J that night at center.
Yeah, you're bringing up some bad memories for me, Dr. Habermas.
I like Dr. J. I like him, but Magic was a stud. He could play any position on the court is where I'm going.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks again, Dr. Habermas. Appreciate all that you do.
Thank you, man. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.